So now we're going to take a look at the West and how the West was molded and how the West operated to kind of benefit the United States as a whole, the growing United States as a whole. So you're going to have vaqueros and cowboys in the West. And so by 1866, there were 55,000 cowboys that worked the open range. And what I mean by open range is land where cattle roam free. And so cowboy lifestyle stemmed from Spanish ranchers in Mexico. So these cowboys are going to kind of be influenced by these vaqueros. And so early cowboys were Mexican vaqueros. They influenced cowboy clothes, cowboy food, vocabulary, and also way of life. And also 25% of cowboys were Black, were African American. And so the reason why, and I'm pretty sure this doesn't get, talked about a lot, but working as a cowboy appeared to former slaves because these African Americans were historically judged on their color. And so as a vaquero or as a cowboy, these African Americans would not be judged on their skin color, but they would be judged on their ability to work. And so these African Americans really went to work, really did a great job on the open range, and were influenced by the Mexican vaquero as well. Now, why is vaquero and cowboys and cattle, why is that all important? Well, in 1860s, you're going to have a growing demand for beef. And so if we kind of go back to the establishment of the 13 colonies, and everything is on the everything is on the eastern coast. And so you're going to have a bunch of immigrants coming over basically for life in America. And so once these immigrants start coming over, their only kind of job would be factory jobs. And so they would come over and they would live in the cities. And so all that is going to be a growing demand for beef, right? People got to eat. And so the growing demand for beef grew as cities in the East were becoming larger. And so the West, of course, is going to have an abundance of Texas Longhorns, cattle that could be used and shipped over to the East as these cities were growing. Now, what these cattle ranchers would do is they would buy cattle for about $3 to $5 a head, and they would drive cows to railheads. And in the next slide, I'll show you a picture of a map and where all those railroads and railheads were headed. But they would essentially buy these cattle for $3 to $5 and then turn around and they would sell the same exact cattle for $30 to $50 a head, and they would be shipped over to Chicago for butchering. And so everybody's got to make a profit, right? So from $3 to $5 now, they raised that to $30 to $50. So the rancher or the farmer would make their money in that way. And so they would send these cattle onto the railroad cars, and then they would be shipped to these eastern cities to be used. Now, on this slide, there is a map, and you can see all these black lines with the little dashes. These are all railroads. These are railheads that were used in the West. And then you have what's in purple, you have the cattle trails. And so if you notice here on the eastern coast, Texas, there is a lot of longhorns. That's why we're known as that's why Texas is known for its longhorns and cattle. And so they would kind of steer the cattle up to these railheads, and they would steer them all the way up to the railroads, put them on the rail cars, sell them for $30 to $50 a head, and then ship them over to the East. Now, the end of the open range is also a STAAR tested question. They do ask you this question every other year. And so the way the STAAR question would like to ask, or the way the STAAR question asks about the open range on the STAAR test, is what ended the open range? And I've seen that question come up maybe about 4 or 5 times. And so what ended the open range, right? Overgrazing the land, bad weather, and the invention of barbed wire is going to help end the cowboy cattle era. And so an open range, like we mentioned before, is where cattle can roam free, right? And so now these cattle that's roaming free, well, that's going to become a problem to the farmer, because now, let's say his cattle can't eat on their land because you're going to have other cattle coming into your property, coming into your land and eating up the resources or eating up the food and taking away from your own cattle. So cowboys and ranchers are going to want to stop doing that, and they're going to use barbed wire, and they're going to start making fences, right, to fence in only their cattle. And so barbed wire turned open plains into a series of fenced in ranches. And so now current day you see fenced in ranches because like I said, you don't want your resources to be eaten by other free roaming cattle. So the most important thing to remember about the end of the open range is or what ended the open range? And your answer always 100% of the time will be barbed wire.